Hank, welcome back to my account and another installment of my series about where I teach you how to knit because you're not getting a lot of love on the internet. But in my heart of hearts, I do believe that the knitting community is overall very supportive and willing to teach. And so that is what I'm doing with these videos and trying to teach Hank Green how to knit. If you're not Hank Green, but you are a true beginner, i.e. you've been scrolling through and looking at some really cool knit things, but you don't know where to get started, this video series is a good start for you. My name is Lindsay at Doing the Most Design. I've been knitting for over 20 years and I've been making tutorials and the such for knitting and crochet for a couple of weeks now, but I have a background in education and I love to teach things. So in this video, I am taking a segment from a previous video that I recorded that was like 18 minutes long, so obviously nobody was going to watch it all the way through. And I am paring it down to just two little sections in which I talk about the quality and aspects of yarn. So some of the characteristics of yarn that might help us choose one yarn over the other are going to be the hand of the yarn and the halo of the yarn. So this video will explain what those things mean. If you learned something from this video, I'd love it if you would follow my account so that you can have access to more of these sort of knitting content, tutorials, tips, guides, support from my account in your feed. But also, I'd love it if you'd leave a comment and tag Hank Green so that he knows that there's somebody out here who's willing to engage him and teach him this really amazing craft that the rest of us do have access to and want him to learn more about. Okay, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll get into that video segment now. The next thing I want to talk about for you is the hand. So the hand of a fiber just generally means how soft does it feel in your hands as you're working it up. This is going to be important because there are some fibers that are, I don't want to say scratchy, but they're going to maybe drain the moisture out of your hands and you're going to feel like your cuticles get dry or like your hands feel dry. There will be an impulse for you to use lotion and then you go back to the knitting, but you can leave lotion residue on your knitting and that's not really great. And then also, if you're making a project for the very first time, you don't want to select yarn that is going to feel bad in your hands because then you're not going to keep up with the project and you're sort of in a very subconscious way, you're going to regret starting the project and probably procrastinate on it and never finish it. This is incredibly important because there are a lot of products in the knitting community that have to be done in pairs. So like with socks, for example, you have to knit the first sock and then you got to knit the second sock. And in our community, we usually say, hey, I'm stuck on second sock island. And what that means is I've lost all will to knit this second frickin' sock because the first one maybe had one of these features, like it wasn't fun or it wasn't fast or it didn't challenge you or the hand of it didn't feel good. And so you eventually end up kind of losing your motivation to do the second one. Same thing with knitting garments. There's a sleeve and then there's the second sleeve. And sometimes people say that they're stuck on second sleeve island. Now, fun little tidbit fact, there are some really ingenious women knitters who have come up with some very practical solutions for that. And there are a lot of tutorials that are out there that'll show you how to do what's called 2 at a time socks or 2 at a time sleeves. And it's a combination of levers and pulleys. I'm kidding. It's not a Rube Goldberg machine, but there's some really ingenious ways for you to knit both of them at the same time. So it just feels like one singular project as opposed to two projects that then produce one pair. So let's talk about the halo of a yarn. Halo kind of refers to, you see how my hairs are kind of standing up here? That's what happens when you get a halo in a yarn. And basically what's happening is that you have some fibers that instead of staying within the strand or the ply of how that fiber is created, they sort of stick up like this. And sometimes people can find that they are quite itchy or they find that they're overstimulating. They do not like the texture of those kind of fibers that have high halo. For example, mohair is one of those fibers. I myself am one of those kind of people that I just don't like the way that it sits on my skin. But it is, again, as I mentioned earlier, an elite animal fiber. And so oftentimes what people will do, because mohair is so expensive, it's rare that people will knit an entire sweater, for example, out of mohair, but they'll take really thin, like a lace weight version of mohair, and they'll combine it, hold it at the same time with a fingering weight or a worsted weight yarn, and then they knit up the whole garment like that. So the garment will have some fluff or fuzz that comes off of it, and that is part of the charm of having a yarn with halo, if that's something that feels good for you and is nice for you. Now let's talk about color. So with color, I have to highly recommend, especially for beginners, that you start with colors that are going to be very clearly visible for you. Really at the outset, I'm just going to say, don't knit anything with black yarn. Okay, so not to say that it's cursed, but the challenge is that it can be very difficult for you to see the stitches as you are learning to create stitches. And so it can minimize your accuracy and make it more difficult while you're learning a new skill. Eventually, when you work your way up, black yarn can be just as wonderful to work with, and it adds a really interesting, cool anchoring effect, especially when paired with other multicolored yarns. So like black and rainbow or black and neon. So it can be a really magical color to use eventually, but I do highly recommend that for beginners, you stay away from that. Thank you so very much for watching this video. Don't forget that there is yet one more segment from this longer part 2 video in which I'm going to talk about what's called yarn put-ups, another way of saying whether you find yarn in hanks or in skeins, and explain why you might need to ball up your yarn, etc. So that's going to be in another video. And then in addition to these first 2 videos that I've recorded, I will also be doing some videos for Hank Green to learn how to do knitting and purling stitches with consistency, long tail cast on, and maybe stockinette stitch and garter stitch. Maybe a couple other things besides that. So make sure that you pay attention to my profile for that. Don't forget to check the first video in my profile of this series where I explain yarn weights and needle gauges. Thank you so much again for watching. Bye-bye.